My name is Harper Gyllenhaal, and at 76, life has shown me just about everything. I was born and raised in a small town tucked away in the hills of upstate Pennsylvania. The kind of place where folks still wave from their porches, and the pastor knows your whole family history. The winters there bite through your coat, and the summers smell like honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass. That's where it all began for me. In a time when good girls didn't go out alone, when a family came before everything else, and when a preacher's word held more weight than the mayor's. What I'm about to share isn't easy. It's something I've kept buried so deep it nearly became part of my bones. If regret could kill, I wouldn't be here speaking to you now. This sorrow's been with me like a slow-burning fire, always glowing under the surface. It was love, unexpected, forbidden, and unforgettable. The year was 1968. I had just turned 19. I was working the fabric counter at Taylor's Dry Goods, right there on Main Street. It was a decent job for a young woman, respectable. My father, Mr. Joachim, ran a little corner store that sold everything from canned beans to hand tools. We weren't rich, but we always had enough. Mama, bless her heart, stayed home and looked after the house and us 5 kids. I was the youngest, the only one still living at home. My sisters were married. My brothers had moved out to Pittsburgh for factory work. We lived up on a hilltop in a modest brick house with a vegetable patch out back where Mama grew collard greens and scallions. She kept a few hens too. From the bedroom I once shared with my younger sister before she married, I could look out and see the whole town twinkling below when dusk settled in. It was like watching stars fall to earth. My days followed a steady rhythm. Up early to help with breakfast, off to the store, home for lunch, then back to work. Evenings were quiet, church when we could, or else just sitting in the living room, listening to the radio, mending clothes, or chatting with my parents. Sundays were non-negotiable. Rain or shine, sniffles or no, we were at church. Daddy used to say, God noticed who didn't show up, and that wasn't a chance we were willing to take. That was the day I put on my best dress. It wasn't anything fancy, just a cotton number with little flowers, but I ironed it like it was made of silk, brushed my hair 100 strokes, just like I'd read in one of those women's magazines, and dabbed on some pale lipstick I bought in secret from the pharmacy downtown. That year, we got a new priest. Father Clement, who'd served for decades, was finally too frail to keep up. The new one, Father Antonio Cumberbatch, was said to be the bishop's nephew. He was in his 30s, and from the first moment, you could tell he wasn't like the others. He smiled easily, spoke to kids and elders alike, and had a voice that could silence a restless room. When he read scripture, you couldn't help but listen, even if you didn't believe it. His arrival stirred things up around town. Some of the older ladies adored him. Others weren't too sure about his modern ways. But the younger crowd, we were drawn to him like moths to light. For the rest of the service, I tried not to look at him, but I could feel it, that quiet attention, a kind of presence that wrapped around me. When it came time for communion, I walked up like everyone else. But when he placed the wafer on my tongue, our eyes met again, and I swear there was something there, something unspoken, something tender and unsure. I still don't have the words to explain it, but I saw it, clear as day. I remember walking back home that day with my heart pounding far too hard, as if it had a secret it didn't know how to keep. My mother noticed the flush in my cheeks and asked if I was feeling all right. I told her it was the heat. It wasn't. It was something stirring inside me, something I should have silenced right then and there, that quiet Sunday afternoon. But I didn't, and it would come to change everything. Not long after, I found myself at church more often. I signed up for every activity, potlucks, youth meetings, Sunday school, you name it. Anything that gave me a reason to be near him. Father Antonio always greeted me with kindness, spoke to me with that calm, respectful tone he used with everyone. But he kept his distance, and somehow that made me want to be closer. I wasn't the only one either. Most women in the parish admired him. It was hard not to. He was young, handsome, and spoke with passion about love, faith, and compassion. But I noticed the way his gaze lingered just a second longer when it met mine, how his smile softened when I walked into the community room for the youth group. At the little gift shop where I worked, the older women liked to talk about him. What a waste, they'd say, shaking their heads with half smiles. A man like that should have been a husband, raised a beautiful family. I had listened, pretending not to care, but their words made something twist inside me, like he was somehow already mine and they didn't know it. Boys my age would have tried to ask me out, usually after Sunday Mass. They'd offer to take me out for the ice cream or come by the house to chat with my dad. I always said no politely, told my mom I wasn't ready to date, that I wanted to focus on work, help out more at home. Truth was, after Father Antonio, none of them held my attention, not even close. One afternoon, we were decorating the parish hall for the summer fair, our version of a 4th of July celebration. The place smelled like straw and popcorn, and we'd strung up colorful paper flags along the ceiling. I volunteered to help and ended up alone with him, setting up streamers. I was standing on this wobbly old stool, reaching high to tape a flag, when he warned me I might fall. I turned to him with a teasing smile and asked, "Would you catch me if I did?" Something shifted in his eyes, just for a heartbeat, before he looked away and gently scolded me for joking like that. But I wasn't joking. Back then, I was 19, full of confidence, and convinced I understood life. I didn't. Life has its own way of teaching lessons. Quiet at first, then loud, like the thunder that follows a Texas storm. After that day, I noticed him changing. He stopped being alone with me. If he saw me coming, he'd make sure someone else was around. But I wasn't the kind of girl to give up easily. There was something in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, something that made me believe it wasn't just my imagination. Summer rolled on. July came, and with it, the annual county fair. Folks from all around showed up for funnel cakes, bluegrass music, and local crafts. My dad finally let me go with Lucia and Connie, my two closest friends from the northern hills. That night, as we wandered past food trucks and booths strung with lights, I saw him, Father Antonio, alone, strolling past a row of handmade quilt stalls. He wasn't in his collar, just a man in jeans and a button-down, blending in with the crowd. He looked almost ordinary. I told my friends I needed to pick something up and that I'd meet them later at Mrs. Joshin's funnel cake stand. Then I followed him, keeping my distance. There was a looseness to him that night, a softness I'd never seen before. He stopped near the old floral clock by the park entrance, and when the foot traffic thinned out, I finally called his name. He turned, startled to see me. His eyes searched mine, full of surprise, maybe even a flicker of guilt. I teased him gently, told him I'd never seen him out of his priest clothes before. He said he sometimes needed to feel like just a regular man. I shot back that he had never been ordinary. To me, we fell into silence. On that quiet, dimly lit street, with the sound of summer festivities drifting from a block away, I felt it in my bones. Something was about to shift between us. He suggested I head back to my friends, muttering that it wasn't a good look for me to be seen with him under those circumstances. I asked him then, what was he so afraid of? Was it me? Or was it what he felt? My words seemed to catch him off guard. Like a sudden gust of wind, he looked down, fumbling to explain that I was misunderstanding him, but I wasn't. I saw the same feeling I had reflected in his eyes, clear and unmistakable. And when he tried to pull away, I stepped closer. His eyes, locked on mine, were dark and full of turmoil. I called him just Antonio, leaving off the father for the first time, and told him I knew he felt something too. And there, beneath the fading glow of the county fair's lights, with the July heat wrapping around us like a blanket, we crossed a line we could never uncross. We kissed. We held each other. We gave in to a desire we both knew we shouldn't have. His hands gripped my waist, drawing me in. My fingers tangled in his hair. The world around us vanished. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and trembling, I saw tears glimmering in his eyes. He whispered a prayer, asking forgiveness. From God. From me. But there wasn't true remorse in his voice. Only fear. Fear of what we'd done. Fear of where this might lead. I told him not to apologize for something so beautiful. I couldn't believe this was a sin. He closed his eyes like he was trying to collect his thoughts, and when he opened them again, something had changed. There was resolve now. He said we needed to talk, but not here. Not like this. It was too risky. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I replayed our kiss over and over. His hands on my waist, the heat of his body, the taste of his lips. I knew we had crossed the line. I knew this path would be hard, but none of that mattered in the face of one truth. He felt it too. It wasn't just in my head. What we had was real, powerful enough to make him question everything. The next morning, I made up a story at home. Told my mom I was helping Lucia organize books at the church library. She didn't press for details, but I could feel her eyes on me as I walked out the door. I cut through the back path behind St. Vincent's Hospital and took the dirt road leading to St. Sebastian's Chapel. I got there early. The chapel was just as I remembered it, small, worn by time. Its bell tower now home to nesting birds. The heavy wooden door was locked, but light streamed through the side windows, casting soft patterns on the stone floor, now scattered with leaves the wind had carried in. I sat on the stone bench by the door, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was nervous, scared, yet completely sure of what I wanted. Then I heard footsteps. I stood. Antonio was walking toward me, still wearing his black cassock, which surprised me. I thought he'd come in regular clothes like the night before. As he approached, I saw it on his face. A gravity, a tension. It wasn't the expression of a man coming to see the woman he had kissed just the day before. It was the kind of face that spoke volumes without saying a word, like he'd been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders all night. When I asked what was going on, Antonio said he'd spent hours praying, asking God to show him the right path. I asked if he'd gotten an answer. He nodded slowly, then told me that what happened between us had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that couldn't happen again. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I stared at him, stunned, and asked how he could reduce everything we shared to a lapse in judgment. He looked down, searching for words, and finally said he didn't know what else to call it. He brought up his vows, the promises he'd made to live in purity, serving only the church. Said he couldn't break them. I reminded him he already had when he kissed me, when he told me we needed to talk, like there was a we worth talking about. But he insisted it had been a mistake. Then his eyes met mine, wet with unshedded tears, and he said that what he felt didn't matter, only what was right did. I asked him, and who decides that? The church, God, or your own heart? He started saying I was young and beautiful, that I'd find a good man someday, marry, have a family. But I cut him off, told him I didn't want some other man. I wanted him. That's when he almost shouted, "I'm a priest." And I said, "You're a man first, a man who feels, who longs, who loves." I stepped closer, so close I could feel his warmth, smell the faint scent of incense clinging to his clothes. I begged him, look me in the eyes and tell me he didn't love me. For a moment, we just stood there, barely inches apart, and then something in him cracked. Antonio reached for me, pulled me into his arms, and kissed me with a desperation that made my knees weak. It was a kiss full of yearning and fear, as if he'd been holding it in forever. Still, our meetings began just as we'd planned. Every Tuesday, I came up with a new excuse. Sometimes it was Bible study. Other times I said I was visiting a sick friend or helping at the parish library. My mother had started to suspect something. I could see it in the way her eyes lingered on me when I left the house, looking far too polished for something as simple as running errands. She never asked questions, never confronted me outright, but the air was thick with unspoken doubts. We found our little hideaway in an old farmhouse just outside town, once part of a grand estate that had long since fallen into disrepair. The main house was crumbling, its roof partially caved in, ivy creeping up its sides like time reclaiming what was hers. But tucked behind it was a smaller cottage, the old caretaker's place, still standing firm. It had a modest bedroom, a dusty living area, and a worn kitchen, just enough for what we needed. That summer, it became our world. Week after week, we returned to that quiet refuge. Still, I kept telling myself, nothing worth having ever comes easy. And this love, it was worth everything. Then came September, warm and golden, painting the trees with early hints of fall. With it came the change that would shatter everything. At first, I ignored the signs. My cycle had never been reliable, sometimes late from stress or a shift in diet. But when 1 week became 2, then 3, I couldn't keep pretending. The truth was clawing its way into my life. I was tired all the time. Mornings were hardest. With nausea, I brushed off as a bug or bad food. My chest ached in unfamiliar ways. Still, I clung to doubt, told myself it could be anything but this. But deep down, I already knew. The next morning, I found the courage to take the bus to the far side of town, to a little pharmacy run by Mr. Genesi, where no one really knew me. I bought something the older woman whispered about, an herbal remedy that could bring on a late period, if that's all it was. Bitter herbs I mixed with honey, just like they said. I drank it for 3 days. All I got was a stomachache so bad I had to call in sick to work. There was no denying it anymore. Harper Gyllenhaal, daughter of Teresa and Joaquim, a girl from a good family in a quiet southern town, was pregnant, and the father was the man the whole congregation looked up to. The man who guided souls to God. The man who had sworn himself to chastity in the eyes of the Almighty. Our next meeting was set for the following Tuesday. Those 7 days stretched longer than any week I've ever lived. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. At Sunday Mass, I couldn't bring myself to go up for a communion. Couldn't bear to meet Anthony's eyes. I saw him scan the crowd, confusion and worry written all over his face when he realized I wasn't coming forward. When Tuesday finally arrived, I made my way to the old Meneses mill, a place we'd used before, my heart weighing heavier with each step. The sky was gray, thick with clouds, like even the heavens knew what was coming. He was already there, sitting on the stone steps out front. His face lit up when he saw me, until it didn't. The moment he caught my expression, his smile faded. He stood quickly, concerned about replacing the warmth. He asked what was wrong, but I walked past him into the dim little room we sometimes used, my legs shaking beneath me. I sank into an old chair, the one we dragged in months ago, and he followed, kneeling beside me. He held my cold hands in his, gently urging me to talk, said I was scaring him. I took a deep breath, trying to find the words, but there were no good ones, no easy way to say it. So I said it plain. I was pregnant with his child. The silence that followed stretched on forever. I watched his face shift, shock, disbelief, fear, and then a pure panic that made me almost pity him. He stammered, asking if I was sure. I told him I hadn't had my period in 2 months, that all the signs were there. He let go of my hands and stumbled to his feet like he'd been hit. His usually fair skin turned ghostly pale. For a second, I thought he might pass out. He kept repeating it over and over, his hands tangled in his hair like he was trying to hold himself together. "This can't be happening," he muttered, like a man in free fall. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks, but I didn't even bother to wipe them away. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe that he'd pull me into his arms and say it would be okay, that this was just another reason for us to stay together. But instead, all I saw was fear, raw, paralyzing fear, and it cut me deeper than I expected. My voice trembled as I spoke through the tears, telling him this wasn't just on me, that we were in it together. That's when he froze, finally looking at me. There were tears in his eyes too, and when he spoke again, his voice had softened. He said he knew. I wasn't blaming him. Then he dropped to his knees in front of me, rested his head in my lap, and I felt his shoulders shake with quiet sobs. I stroked his hair, feeling the strange shift in roles. Suddenly, I was the one holding him up. I was the one who had to be strong. I asked him what we were going to do. He looked up, his face blotchy and red, tears carving tracks down his cheeks. He said he didn't know, that this changed everything, that a child. He couldn't even finish the sentence. I reminded him that he'd once talked about leaving the priesthood, about moving to Chicago and starting fresh. But he cut me off, mumbling that things were different now, that this was bigger, not just a career change. This was a scandal, one that could wreck everything. His name, my name, our child's future. I snapped, asking if he expected me to just vanish or give the baby away like it was nothing. He shut his eyes tight, like the words had struck him across the face. He said he didn't know, that he needed time, that he had to pray, to think, to find a way through this that wouldn't break us all. I told him no such path existed. There was no painless way through this. I asked what kind of dreamland he thought we were living in. where a single woman could carry a baby in a town like ours and not be shamed in the pews or gossiped about in every corner store. He said he knew, that he understood, that this was the end of everything, his calling, my name, the life we'd imagined. I told him it didn't have to be the end, it could be the start of something else, something harder, sure, but real. We could walk through it side by side, for us, for our baby. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, I saw something flicker in his eyes, a sliver of hope. But it disappeared just as fast, replaced by that distant calculating look I'd grown to dread, the one that didn't belong to the man I loved, but to the priest who measured every consequence. He asked for time, said this was too big for a snap decision. He needed space to think. Tuesday felt like it would never come. And when it finally did, I drove over to the old Miller farm with a flicker of hope in my chest. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, that week apart had given Antonio the clarity he needed to figure things out. But the place was deserted. I waited for hours. He never showed. I went home numb, unsure if I was more afraid or angry. The next morning, I marched straight to St. Mary's, determined to find him. A sweet older lady dusting the altar told me Father Antonio had left on a sudden trip. My head spun. He was gone. Just like that. No goodbye, no explanation, no warning. He had vanished, left me, left us, left our unborn child behind like it was nothing. Then the whisper started. Some said the bishop had sent him on a special assignment way out in rural Bahia, where they were desperate for clergy. Others claimed he'd requested to enter a monastery in Olinda for an indefinite spiritual retreat. The church ladies passed rumors around like pies at a potluck, each insisting she knew the real reason he left. Of course, none of them ever linked his sudden departure to the quiet girl from the fabric store, the one who now carried the town's most scandalous secret beneath her sweater. The days that followed were the darkest I've ever known. Every morning, I woke hoping it had all been some terrible dream, that he'd knock on my door, eyes full of answers, ready to make things right. But he didn't. Not once. No phone call, no note. My mother started noticing. She'd find me crying, ask what was wrong. I made things up, said I was stressed from work, that I'd had a falling out with a friend, that I'd read something sad. She pretended to buy it, but her eyes said otherwise. She knew something deeper was breaking. Meanwhile, my body was changing in quiet ways no one else could see. My belly was still flat to the world, but I could feel it hardening under my hands. My breast ached with weight I wasn't used to. Morning nausea became a part of my routine. That's when the letter came. No return address, just my name. Antonio's elegant penmanship, the same I'd seen so many times on church announcements and mass bulletins. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short note and a thick envelope of cash. The letter said, "Harper, I'm sorry I couldn't face it. I'm leaving for a monastery in Olinda for an indefinite retreat. After that, I've asked to be transferred elsewhere. I hope this money helps. Turn to your family. I pray for you and the child every day. May God forgive us." No signature, none needed. Every word cut deeper than the last. He was never coming back. He had chosen his priesthood over us. He had walked away. I ripped the letter into pieces, my tears smudging the ink as I tore. But the money I kept. Pride wouldn't pay for diapers or a midwife when the time came. My Aunt Dulce was the one who saved me. Mom's younger sister, a widow who lived alone in a little house one town over in Greenwood. No kids, just a quiet life and a big heart. I used to spend summers there as a girl. She was never one for long talks, but she always knew how to listen. I went to see her that Sunday. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I was going to burst. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't throw stones. Aunt Dulce had always been that kind of person. I told her everything, from the first glance we shared at the church to the gutless letter that sealed it all. I cried harder than I ever had, right there in her warm little kitchen that smelled like fresh coffee and cornbread. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened, holding my hand with her callous fingers now and then. When I finished, I braced myself for a lecture or at least some disappointment, but all she did was let out a long breath, tuck a gray strand behind her ear, and tell me I was carrying a heavy cross. But I didn't have to carry it alone. She said she'd help. Her plan was simple enough. I would tell my folks she wasn't doing well and needed someone around. I'd go stay with her for a while, just until the baby came. After that, we'd figure things out. It wasn't a perfect fix, she admitted, but it would buy us time. I drove back home that night with a strange heaviness in my chest. Part relief, part dread. Relief that I wasn't hiding anymore, that there was at least some kind of plan, that I wasn't completely on my own. But the fear of what my parents would say, of what came next, of what kind of life was waiting for my child, settled in my bones. Convincing my parents wasn't hard. Aunt Dulce truly wasn't in great shape. Her arthritis flared up whenever the New England cold crept in, and her blood pressure had been all over the place. Me going to help her out for a while sounded reasonable enough. So, on a chilly Saturday morning in October, I packed 2 suitcases and left for a small town in upstate New York called Fairview. It was less than 2 hours from home, but the goodbye still hit hard. Not because of the distance, it was close enough to visit on weekends, but because I knew I was leaving under a lie. And deep down, I knew that by the time I came back, everything would be different. Fairview made our little town look like a bustling city. Aunt Dulce's house sat at the end of a quiet side street, a bit away from town. It was small and worn in all the right ways. 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen living space, and a backyard where a few hens wandered between an old cherry tree and some overgrown berry bushes. She had fixed up the guest room for me, once my late uncle's space. There was a narrow twin bed, an old vanity, and a creaky wooden wardrobe. Lace curtains she'd sewn herself hung at the window. "This will be your little corner while you're here," she said, helping me unpack. "If you need anything, just ask." And that room, with its cool cement floors and whitewashed walls, became the place where everything about me quietly shifted. Time moved slower in Fairview. Days melted into each other, soft and uneventful. I woke early, made breakfast with Aunt Dulce, and helped her clean and tidy the house. In the afternoons, we sat out on her tiny porch. She'd knit tiny sweaters and booties for the baby while I tried to learn cross-stitch. She said it helped calm the nerves. At night, we'd listen to the radio or just talk, sometimes for hours. She told me stories about when she and my mom were girls, tales I'd never heard before. Listening to her, I started to see my mother differently. I began to understand the sharpness in her voice, the way she always worried, how she tried to control everything. She had grown up with the grief, with the fear. She had learned early that life could hurt, and that you had to protect yourself and those you loved. By the 3rd month that my mom came to visit, she didn't stay long. One night, one awkward afternoon, she looked at me in that way only a mother can. Saw right through me, even though I wore loose sweaters and sat with a pillow over my lap. She didn't say anything outright, but her silence said enough. She knew, or at least she feared she did. But neither of us were ready to speak the truth. When she left, she took a basket of fruit from Aunt Dulce's backyard, apples, maybe some blackberries, and left behind a silence so thick it echoed through the house long after her car disappeared down the road. I cried all through the night after she left, the pain settling deep in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. It wasn't just grief. It was the sense that a wall had grown between me and my family, a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. Aunt Dulce did her best to comfort me. "Give it time, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing the hair from my face. "When the baby arrives, you'll find the right moment to talk. Everything has a way of settling." I clung to her words, the way someone lost at sea might cling to a floating board. I had to believe something good would come, that my child and I could still have a future, even if it looked nothing like what I had imagined. I hadn't heard a single word from Antonio since the letter. I found myself wondering, was he okay? Was he thinking of me? Did regret keep him awake at night like it did me? Would he ever want to meet his son? The labor pains came with the spring storms, just before dawn on a wet and restless May morning. I had never felt anything like it, waves of pain that left no room to breathe. It was long, agonizing. Hours passed like days, every contraction more punishing than the last. There were no doctors, no epidurals, just a midwife with the thick, gentle hands, and my aunt, who never left my side. Through every scream, every push, I thought of Antonio, of how he walked away, of how I was doing this without him. I swore in those hours I'd never forgive him for it. And then suddenly, a sound, piercing, fierce, alive. My son's cry, full of fire. Mrs. Sebastiana smiled and held him up for me, a little red-faced bundle full of life and noise. "You've got a boy," she said, her voice warm, strong as they come. They placed him in my arms, and I swear the world changed just like that. Every ounce of pain, every ounce of shame melted into something else, something holy. I looked at him, at his tiny hands, his blinking eyes, and I felt a love so huge it swallowed everything else. "Josh," I whispered, tracing his cheek with my finger. "That's his name. Josh, like my grandfather. A name rooted in work and grit. A name that carried no judgment, no hint of the past. A name that could open doors, sleepless nights, beatings around the clock, laundry piles full of tiny clothes and cloth diapers, but also gummy smiles and warm baby breath on my neck. In all that chaos, I held something that no one could ever take from me. Aunt Dulce was my rock. She didn't have children of her own, but she had raised a small army of nieces and nephews, and she poured everything she knew into helping me. She brewed herbal teas to help with my milk supply, made hearty soups to build my strength. "You've got to stay strong," she'd say, adjusting the blanket around Josh. "That little one needs you." I hadn't told my parents. I couldn't bring myself to. Every time they called or talked about visiting, I found a reason to stall. Aunt Dulce wasn't feeling well. The weather was too bad for travel. Anything to delay that moment. But deep down, I knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever, especially not with Josh growing fast, chubby cheeks, lively eyes, the spitting image of his father. He had Antonio's shut-up chin, his deep, unreadable stare. When Josh turned 4 months old, I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to my mother. I didn't tell her who the father was. I just told her I'd made a mistake, that I was sorry for the pain I'd caused, but not for Josh, never for him. I told her I loved him more than anything and that I was going to raise him with all the dignity I could muster. A week later, on a hot September afternoon, someone knocked on the door. That's my mother. We stood in silence, just looking at each other. Then she stepped inside and wrapped me in the kind of hug that breaks you and puts you back together all at once. I cried like a child in her arms, whispering apologies between sobs. "Where is he?" she finally asked, her voice thick with emotion. I led her to the crib. Josh was still sleeping, his little chest rising and falling. My mother stood there for a long time, just watching him, and then, with hands that trembled, she reached out and gently touched his cheek. "He looks just like your brother Pedro did as a baby," she finally said. There was no blame in her voice, only a quiet sadness, the kind that comes from having cried all your tears and now only silence remains. I gave her a softened version of the truth, told her I had been involved with a man who promised marriage, only to vanish when he learned I was pregnant. I didn't mention that it was Father Antonio. That truth was far too heavy. She didn't press me to reveal his name. Before she left, she gave me a gentle warning. "Your father doesn't know yet. I'll tell him in my way when I feel the time is right. But Harper, I can't promise he'll take it like I did. He's a good man, but proud. You know how much he cares about his name, about what people think in this town." I understood what she couldn't bring herself to say aloud, that he might not forgive me so easily. "You raise your boy, Harper. You love him. You walk with your head high. You show him and the world that a mistake doesn't define who you are." She left with those words, promising she'd write, send what she could, money, clothes for the baby, anything that wouldn't raise suspicion back home. I stood on the porch with Josh in my arms, watching the greyhound pull away, my heart torn between relief for having finally told someone and the weight of knowing just how hard the road ahead would be. Time passed. Josh grew into a lively, curious little boy. His first tooth, his first step, the first time he called me Mama. Each of those moments felt like small miracles, shared between me, my mother when she could visit, and my Aunt Dulce, who'd been my rock through it all. Mom came when she could, always bringing something hidden in her purse, a new pair of shoes, a few dollars, a soft toy she'd bought in town. As we expected, my father didn't take the news well. Mom told me he didn't speak for days, then exploded in anger, breaking dishes, storming around the house, only to collapse into a quiet grief that settled over him like a heavy fog. "He says he failed you," she confided one evening. "Says you've ruined the family's name, that people are looking at him differently now. Give him time," she'd always say. "He's not a bad man, Harper, just proud. One day he'll want to meet his grandson." I wanted to believe her. I dreamed of the day I could take Josh back home, introduce him to his grandfather, to the neighbors who used to wave as I passed by. But I knew the odds, even with the lie I told about a man who ran off and left me pregnant. It wasn't enough to stop the rumors. People love to talk. It was Aunt Dulce who first suggested starting fresh somewhere else. She had a friend in Mobile, Alabama, Mrs. Clotilde, a kind woman who ran a boarding house for young women. "Mobile's a bigger place," Aunt Dulce said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You can disappear there, find work, raise Josh without everyone watching your every move. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," she added gently. "You know that. But this house, this neighborhood, it's too small. People are already asking questions about the baby. Sooner or later, The whispers will find their way back to your father." Deep down, I knew she was right. It had been over a year since I left home. Josh was 15 months old, now walking, babbling his first words. I couldn't hide forever. I needed to build a future, one that didn't come with shame attached to every door I knocked on. So Aunt Dulce wrote to Mrs. Clotilde, telling her a carefully crafted version of my story, that I was a young widow, my husband having passed away before the baby was born. Widowhood, she said, was more acceptable. It would open more doors, Mrs. Clotilde replied quickly, offering me a room and the promise to help me find work. Saying goodbye to Aunt Dulce was one of the hardest things I've ever done. That woman, with her rough hands and warm heart, had been more than an aunt. She'd been my friend, my counselor, my second mother during the darkest season of my life. "I'll miss you both," she whispered, hugging Josh tightly. "But this is right. Go build your life. Be happy." And so I went. Mobile greeted me with its thick southern heat, the kind that clings to your skin and soaks your shirt by mid-morning. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was a place to begin again. It couldn't have been more different from the quiet charm of Garanhuns or the slower pace of Bomconsello. This new place buzzed with life. I found a room in a modest boarding house run by Miss Clotilde, tucked away on a shaded street just a short walk from downtown. The house was old, sturdy, with thick brick walls that held in the cool air even during the worst of the summer heat. Mine was no bigger than a closet, but it was clean, just enough space for a twin bed, a crib for Josh, and a small dresser where I kept a few clothes. Miss Clotilde was in her early 60s, a solidly built woman with a practical streak and a kind smile. A widow, at least that's what she thought I was. It was through her that I got my first job in town, folding clothes and helping customers at a small boutique owned by one of her friends. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but it was a start. Life in Karuaru felt like stepping into a different story. No judgmental stares, no whispers behind my back. People didn't ask questions. No one cared why I was there or what I had run from. I was just another single mother doing her best to raise her boy. Slowly, I started building something like a life. Meeting people, learning the bus routes, finding my rhythm in a place that felt noisy but strangely welcoming. Mama wrote often from Garanhuns, filling her letters with family news. My father, still silent, still refusing to even hear Josh's name. But my brothers, especially Pedro, the oldest, was starting to ask about him. "One day," Mama wrote, "when time has softened the pain a bit, you'll bring him home to meet everyone." I hoped for that day, but I no longer pinned my happiness to it. Life rarely followed the scripts we wrote in our heads. Sometimes you had to draw a new map. When Josh turned 17, something happened that shifted the course of our lives once again. He walked in from school, holding a paper in his hand, his whole face lit up with a joy I hadn't seen before. He had passed the test to work at a local credit union, a respectable job with good benefits, something solid, steady. For a kid raised by a single mom in a modest neighborhood just outside of Houston, it was a big deal. Mr. Alvarenga, one of the managers there, had told him he'd never seen someone so naturally gifted with numbers. Josh practically spun me around the kitchen in his excitement, arms around me in a tight hug. "I start next week, Mom. It's just an internship for now, but if I do well, it could lead to a permanent position." I wrapped him in my arms, eyes stinging with tears. How do you put into words the pride of watching the child Everyone told it was a mistake, growing to a man so kind, so honest, so determined. He'd pushed through every hardship, every absence, every shadow. That night, after he had fallen asleep, I stood quietly in the living room and looked at his high school graduation photo hanging on the wall. He looked so much like Antonio. The same piercing eyes, the same determined chin, even the same little furrow in his brow when he was deep in thought. And just like that, a wave of old sorrow washed over me, soft, no longer sharp like it once was. I let myself feel it. When Josh turned 23, he told me he was getting married. His fiancée, Mariana, was a sweet young woman, daughter of shopkeepers he had met at church. Yes, Josh had chosen faith all on his own. I never pushed it. He went to church every Sunday. And maybe, I thought with a wry smile, maybe that pool was just in his blood. They wanted a small ceremony at St. Peter's Parish, followed by a modest reception in the church hall. Josh insisted we invite the whole family from back in Mississippi. "It's time, Mom," he said. "I want to meet my uncles, my cousins. I want Grandma and Grandpa to see the man I've become because of you." I wrote to my mother, who now visited Jackson twice a year and always stayed at my place, never letting my father know. I told her about the wedding, extended the invitation to everyone. She wrote back almost immediately. She'd be there, and she'd bring my siblings and their families too. My father? Well, my father still couldn't bring himself to come. Some wounds don't close all the way, no matter how many years pass. As the wedding plans moved forward, I found myself thinking more and more about Antonio. I knew deep down Josh deserved to know the truth before he started a family of his own. Maybe it was time to find closure for both of us. Finding Antonio wasn't simple. The trip lasted 3 long days and nights. You don't realize how vast America is until you cross it by bus. When I finally arrived in a small town outside of St. Louis, my body ached and my heart was pounding. The town reminded me a bit of the old neighborhood, hilly, a little gray, colder than I was used to. But the people were different. They spoke with a twang, dressed in layers, ate foods I'd never heard of. The parish was a tall stone church, nothing like the colonial one back home. I asked around, and an older man pointed me toward the rectory. A woman with silver hair and a strong Italian accent answered the door. She was the housekeeper. She told me the priest was finishing the evening mass and would be back shortly. I waited on a bench in the small square nearby, and then I saw him. He walked down the church steps with careful steps, older now. His hair, mostly gray, his face fuller, movement slower. But it was him, the man who had once turned my world upside down. He didn't recognize me at first. I had changed too. Time does that to us all. But when I stepped closer and said his name, I saw it, the flicker of recognition, then the shock, then something else, something heavier, guilt. We found a quiet little cafe tucked away from the square. He could barely meet my eyes. I ordered a coffee. He didn't want anything. His hands trembled just slightly as they rested on the table between us. I started talking slowly, telling him about Josh, how our boy had grown into a strong, kind man, how he was getting married soon, how I had never, in all these years, told him the truth. When I pulled out the photo from Josh's graduation at the bank and slid it across the table, I watched the tears rise in Father Antonio's eyes. The resemblance was unmistakable. Same eyes, same jawline, even the same way he smiled when caught off guard. Antonio admitted he had never stopped thinking about us. He said he still prayed for me and for the boy every night. That guilt had eaten away at him until the only thing he could do was run far away. That for years he thought about leaving the priesthood, but fear always got the better of him. I didn't feel angry, not even bitter. What I felt was a deep, aching sorrow for what could have been, but never was. For the dreams we buried, for the family we never became, for the time we lost. I asked if he'd like to meet Josh. He paused. There was something in his eyes. Maybe fear, maybe hope, maybe both. After all this time, could it really happen? Would Josh even want that? Truthfully, I didn't know. I hadn't come with a plan, just the quiet certainty that I needed to close this chapter before it was too late. We agreed he would come to Louisville after Easter. That would give me enough time to talk to Josh, to tell him the truth I'd kept hidden his entire life. I drove home that day, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Lighter. They say truth sets you free. And after carrying this weight on my shoulders for so long, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could let it go. But life, as always, had its own ideas. A week after I got back, a telegram arrived. Father Antonio had passed away suddenly, a heart attack right in the middle of Mass, while blessing the bread and wine. He died at the altar, doing what he'd never been able to walk away from. Maybe that was God's way of calling him home, of forgiving him. I didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't. I had Josh to think about. I couldn't risk raising questions. So I cried alone behind a locked bedroom door for the man I had loved, for the father of my child, for the sinner who, like me, never found full redemption. Josh never found out. I couldn't bring it myself to tell him after Antonio was gone. What good would it have done to shake the image he had of his late father? To taint the memory of a man who couldn't speak for himself anymore? No, I chose to keep that truth to myself. Josh got married, had children of his own, built a life filled with goodness and purpose. He's honest, he's strong, he's kind, and sometimes when he furrows his brow in thought or laughs in that familiar way, I catch glimpses of Antonio in him. In those moments, a quiet ache stirs inside me, but so does gratitude. Pain for all we lost, thanks for all we gained. Time has dulled the edges of grief. That small Kentucky town where it all began feels like a distant memory now, a place I once passed through in another lifetime. And Antonio? He's just a fading photo, tucked away in an old drawer, alongside other memories only I can interpret. As for Josh, he's become my peace, my atonement, my way of making things right with the past. In him, I see the best parts of myself and of Antonio. In him, I see that even from our deepest mistakes, unexpected blessings can rise. Would I change anything if I could go back? I don't know. That 19-year-old version of me, the girl who fell for the young priest with soft hands and heavy eyes, she feels like a stranger now. Her choices, her hopes, her heart, they belong to another life. Now, as a woman with silver hair and a gentle quiet around her, I understand that every choice we make builds the road we walk on. Mine brought me here, to a modest but honest life, to a son I cherish, to grandkids who light up my days, and to a secret that will be mine until the end. And you, reading this, where are you listening from? Tell me in the comments. It always warms my heart to know how far a story like this can travel.